Welcome to What is Going for new thought from the edge of Each week on OMTimes' flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. Climate change, the pandemic, the refugee emergency, poverty, conflict, and violence. It's hard to imagine that there could be a positive side to these converging global crises. But according to this week's guest, they do have an unsuspected silver lining. They bring us to a tipping point where we can choose our destiny. With me today to outline the nature of this crucial point and share what each of us as a conscious and responsible human being can and must do to choose the right way forward is world-renowned Hungarian philosopher of science, systems theorist, and integral theorist, Ervin Laszlo, a former professor of philosophy, systems science, and future studies at various universities in the US, Europe, and the Far East. Nobel Peace Prize nominee Ervin Laszlo is the author, co-author, or editor of 106 books and over 400 articles and research papers. Ervin Laszlo joins me now to talk about his latest book, The Upshift, Wiser Living on Planet Earth, which not only lays out a pathway to healing and evolution on planet Earth, but also offers us a detailed guide to becoming the change we need to see in the world. Ervin Laszlo, welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Sandie, it's my pleasure to be here. It's a wonderful show, exactly what we need in these days.
Absolutely. In your new book, The Upshift, you claim that humanity is at a historic turning point and that there are two paths opening for us today, a path up to healing and evolution and a path down to crises and chaos. And the global crisis from which we're emerging holds vital lessons for our life and our future. Tell me about those lessons.
Well, the bifurcation or evolution is branching off. If we continue the way we go, that's the downshift, because it's unsustainable. What we are doing needed to be rectified. So it's about time that something is happening to rectify it. It's unlikely that we will continue the way we have been going, living through this crisis period. The need for change is growing. If a little more of the crisis is deepening, is spreading, as it will probably in the next week still, then the motivation will grow until it becomes very evident, not only to policymakers and politicians and business leaders, but to everybody, that we need to shift to another path here to what I call upshift. And that is the option that we have. And I say this is not a bad thing that is happening, it's a necessary thing. This rectification of our past has been overdue. I mean, we didn't start yesterday the way to go the way we have been going. This has been going on for most of the 21st century and the second half of the 20th century. In 1972, we have I, together with my partners and colleagues, have published a report to the Club of Rome, which talked about the limits to growth, saying that it can't go on like this because collapse will happen. And that didn't have much effect. Other people are talking about it. Even though it's only dealt with physical resources, primarily physical resources, and a little bit of the human resources. And it dealt mainly for politicians and policymakers addressing it. So it was a more limited thing. Today we know that it's a global phenomenon. We are at the limits of the kind of growth that we have been exercising, subjecting ourselves to. And that is a good thing. We can continue on this discussion as you like, Sandie. I just want to say, a rectification of the past was overdue. We should be happy and grateful that it's happening before it's too late.
Absolutely. You know, the book lays out some incredible statistics. It's a fabulous book. And I have to say that I was pretty horrified by some of the things that I'd read, because I think the general public really don't know what's going on. I mean, they see the headlines, they see various newspaper reports, but you laid it out so well when you said that, you know, in the mid-1900s or the last century, there were about 1 billion people. Now we've got 7.8 billion people. It's grown so fast, and the cities, how they just aren't sustainable anymore because they're taking and they're not putting anything back into the system. We don't know enough about these kinds of things, and I think that is probably part of the problem, is that the average person doesn't know.
Well, there are ways that we could know, just opening our eyes. But even more important is to open our heart and our mind.
Yes.
That means allow our consciousness to take in more of what is really happening. Also below the surface. The surface is what's in the daily news on every newspaper, standard media, and television station and radio and whatnot. That, I think, is generally knowledge. But under the surface, what is really happening? What I'm telling you, what is happening is an interesting two-pronged process. On the surface part and it appears like it will be a deep reservoir of events, a sphere of vibrations of which are various dimensions. On this top dimension, there is increasing chaos and confusion and disorientation, depression, all these negative signs that you can make is growing very rapidly. Underneath it, there is something else happening. Underneath it, there is a reorientation taking place from the individual, from the national, from the purely business, from the purely power politics section, to something which is larger. It is as if now humanity on this planet is beginning to organize itself to live on this planet consciously. We didn't need to live consciously on the planet because previously our powers were limited. We couldn't do much harm. True, we didn't do much good either for the planet as a whole, but we couldn't harm it much because we had very limited powers. I mean, sort of up to 200, 250 years ago. Then our powers for the 20th century increased, and now they are so great, vast powers that we can destroy all life on Earth. We can push it into an unsustainable situation like Mars, an arid planet. That means no life is possible. That's one of the worst scenarios, perhaps the worst scenarios we could think of. But there are many other ways of unsustainability. Climate change is just an advanced signal of it. So underneath it, there is something else happening. Now, when we talk about the problem, we talk about climate change. We talk about the heating up of the atmosphere in the same way. Then we talk about the refugee crisis. We talk about violence and war and the disheartening of people and the conflicts on various levels. In other words, when we talk about the surface, when we reach to what is happening, we realize that it's all a global phenomenon. It's become a global. Before it was local, then it was national and local, and now it's become global. And all the solutions, just the same way as all the problems, are now on the global level. And that's remarkable, because the phenomenon is now something is being happen. It's being made to happen.
Yeah.
And that's what's being made to happen is overcoming the problems that we have been accumulating for the past 150, 200 years, and especially in the past, let's say, 20, 25 years. And there's high time to have done so. And humanity is becoming organized, reaching to the global level and trying to work out a way in which we can live sustainable on this planet, live so that now today, probably already 8 billion people, because many of these things are not registered on censuses. we estimated already about 8 billion people can live on this planet, and can live so that we don't kill each other, we don't destroy each other, we don't remove the power, the ability to survive and to thrive on this planet. We allow all people to live in peace. There are various ways we can assure that, we can talk about it, but I just want to say the positive side is that there is something happening which was long overdue, which is now taking place. It's a crisis, but the crisis is opportunity.
I think that one of a word that underlies a lot of our problems is separation. You know, we think everything is separate. We think that we are separate from one another, that we're all individuals. And it is now that people, especially with quantum science showing us that everything is connected, people are just beginning to realize that we survive as a collective, not as individuals.
It's interesting to say this. You're absolutely, absolutely right. Einstein, who had never really fully accepted all the findings of the quantum sciences, he kept a very, very matter-of-fact, practical turn of mind. And some of it's so fantastic that it's difficult to accept. But even though that, he said very clearly, separateness is an illusion. That is now coming through more and more in the quantum physics and quantum biology, in the quantum consciousness research, quantum sociology. You can't do just one thing. Gregory Bates has said that already about the environmental crisis. You can't do just one thing, because one thing has so many other implications and consequences. But we can say that we can't do one thing because there is no one thing anybody can do. We can, whenever we do one thing, we address the whole system of connections, of which we are a part. We are not outside. And that's a great, great advantage, a great benefit of the crisis in which we live. That we recognize that first, we are not out of nature. We are not above it. We are not beyond it. Mm. And we have had this sophistry that we can overcome nature, we can become superior to nature, we can use technology to govern nature the way we want. And we are learning that we can't do that. We are part of nature. We are part of the limits of life on Earth, but we're also part of the opportunity of life on Earth. You've got to rejoin, reconnect. These are terms that are coming up more and more. I myself wrote a book about a year and a half ago, reconnecting to the source, but these terms are coming up ever more. Yes, we are not separate. We are one, and the sciences are telling us, but common sense and our consciousness itself will tell us. If we just allow our consciousness to receive that information as we are getting, when we are relaxed, when we allow our mind to float and to encounter people, to experience nature, to experience beauty, and to experience love. I mean, all these experiences have a deep resonance. We are now resonating with the world, with the changing world around us. That's a marvelous opportunity. Let's take it. If we wait too long, it's not guaranteed that we'll succeed, because irreversibilities are occurring. And if we wait too long, we find ourselves in a dead-end street, literally. But we're not there. And I think the opportunity is now to get ourselves together and act together in light of who we are, a natural member of a natural system. It's a beautiful thing to be. We thought if we could just overcome it, we can do what we want. We can't do what we want. We have to do what there is in nature. It's a generous nature. This is an evolutionary universe. It's a participatory universe. All of these things are coming through the new sciences. It's there in our instincts, in our intuition. So let's listen to ourselves. That is the message I'd like to say. Listen, feel who we are, what you are around you. Then you'll find the right way. The right way forward is the upshift, which is a shift into togetherness.
Yeah. You know, your book, The Upshift, outlines a number of recommendations for overcoming the problems that we're facing. Can you share some of those steps with us? Because I think, you know, a lot of people agree with everything that we're saying, but they don't know where to start? What can they do? You know, the pathway that you lay out in the book is very solid. So if you could just share some of the steps along that pathway.
There are several, there are many. The simplest one, except for young kids in big cities, perhaps is not so simple. But for many people, middle-aged people, or a little bit middle-class people, it's possible. Experience nature. You know, Japanese now, John Riku or something like that. There is a word for the Japanese use, which means forest bathing.
Yeah.
It means literally going out into nature, into the trees, embrace the trees, lie down on the lawn, on grass, or on the leaves, and see the sky above you, the clouds. Hear the rustling of the winds in the trees. See, I'm not a poet, you know, I can't say it in that many words, but the fact is, if you allow yourself to experience nature, that's one way. It's not the only way, but there certainly is one way. Another way is, which I think mentioned very briefly, is simply to allow your consciousness to access. All of the Eastern religions, the Eastern spiritual systems, practically without exception, tell us, don't force what you want to achieve. Allow things to happen. Allow your mind to enter a larger dimension. We now know, on looking at the details of the instrumental details also, of the waves that are emitted by our brain, these EEG, electroencephalograph waves. We know that in our everyday beta consciousness, there is a certain level of frequency that we pick up. Above it, we have an exultant consciousness. Deep, sudden inspirations can happen. Sudden exaltation can take place. Below it, there's another dimension, the alpha dimension, the theta dimension, in which connections happen, in which people feel themselves connecting to other people's minds. Our mind, unlike our bodies, are more intimately, directly connected. What happens in our consciousness is a reflection of what happens in other people's consciousness, and it reflects back on that. So there are so many ways that we can relax, we can take the time, we can enjoy life, we can enjoy nature, we can enjoy being what we are, without all the worry, without all the frustrations and fear and that is now so much on the surface today. The depression, that's a danger. All
Yes.
those things are dangerous. But we can be one with the universe. So a poet? No. Science? Yes. This is the new way of understanding of who we are.
You write in the book about one of the things that we can do is to rid ourselves of obsolete beliefs and assumptions. Can you outline some of those beliefs that we need to,
Heavens, yes, but there are lots of them. And I think there's no substitute to just have a look at the book. And in one chapter, I try to summarize most of these. Everything that's individualistic in a separateness sense. The individual is great. We all are individuals. We want to serve the cause of the individual, but we have overdone it. We have separated ourselves off from the collective, from the social systems. So believe that this is only one country. That's one thing, for example. It's only one country to which we owe allegiance. Never mind the rest. There is only one country, which is our flag, our nation, our state, or whatever, and that's for who we are. And the rest is outside of us. The rest they are strangers. These are outdated and dangerous beliefs. We are also members of a family, members of a family, of a community, members of a region, of a state, city, of course, of the nation. But not only that, beyond that, we are also human beings, members of the human family. And even more, the human family is a member of the system of life on Earth, or what is known as the Gaia system. We are all of those things together, not exclusively one. we can have multiple identities. And we have a more embracing identity. It doesn't destroy the local identity. It just incorporates it, embraces it. We can't help it. We can't change that. Life on Earth has developed as a communal form of existence. But strangely enough, and I don't want to get into physics details now, but just to mention that we know that the way atoms come together, using, for example, a so-called exclusion principle of Wolfgang Pauli, but also the whole atomic generation process, the nucleus and the electron shells. These are not accidental conglomerations. They're highly tuned elements, diverse elements coming together. It's as if the nucleus of a hydrogen atom would love certain electrons on a given pass and would accept it into its electron shells. That's a sort of put it metaphorically. But it's every natural system is a system of diverse elements coming into harmony, coming into oneness. And then when we recognize that we're a natural system, the other system with which we are in touch, with which we resonate, are systems that we can embrace, that we can enter into ourselves, into us, so that we become one with them. Again, seems like sophistry, seems like poetry, seems like pure spirituality. But of course, as you know and as you practice, spirituality is a very great guide to the right way to behave in the world. But about the point that I'm trying to make it, when you examine the highest levels of evolutionary development, the highest level of consciousness in people, we find the higher level of spirituality. And it's expressed as a sense of oneness, a sense of belonging, a sense of being part of something larger. William James, the great scientist and philosopher, said that the religious experience, to which he was very much in awe of, he said it's the experience of being part of something larger than we are. And that's now the experience that we need, not just religious experience, the spiritual experience, the aesthetic experience, the natural experience, and the beliefs and convictions that go with it. Not separateness, not just the individual alone, but you and I, individuals, in the embrace of a larger whole. That, I think, is the natural way. It's the way in which we can feel it. When we feel it, we feel closeness, we feel love. And that's the way that we can go forward, because that's the way nature operates. The entire system of life on Earth, on this planet, is a system of highly integrated elements joining together in such a way that every part of the system is an essential part of the whole. If you remove any one part, you damage the whole. If you remove a set of parts, allow them to work separately, then you're creating a disease in the whole. When that happens in the human body or the living body, then we call it a cancer. Information, embracing all things, that's health. And that's being part of, join to others, not by external links, but internally feeling, perceiving of who we are, part of a larger whole, part of an evolving system on the planet, the Gaia system, which I'm sure is also part of an evolution of life on other planets in myriad places in this enormously vast universe.
I read something the other day, a little headline that said, if aliens landed on this planet, they wouldn't want to study humans. They would want to study ants because they have the system down, and they would want to know how is it that ants, have organized such an incredible system. It strikes me that we would do well to study ants ourselves and behave a little bit more like they do.
We don't know actually what is it that orients ants in such a fantastically coordinated way. So the ant colony is not a heap of separate individuals. It's really, you just look at it because you see the individual ants with your eyes. You can touch the individual ant, the insect. But actually, that's a whole system of which that end that we have in mind, that we look at, is only a manifestation. It's a single level of expression. The system that's real is the whole. The great German philosopher Hegel said, "Das Wahre ist das Ganze," he said in German. The true is the whole. And that inspired many philosophies since then. It's known as the holistic philosophy. Yes. Wholeness. We're looking for wholeness. But I would take exception to this premise of looking at the ants. If you want to study life on Earth, look at consciousness, because what we have is something unique. All things have consciousness, I want to say that, but the way human consciousness is articulate, is able to express itself, is able to perceive and to respond to perception, that's more developed than any consciousness on this planet. Perhaps whales and dolphins come together, come closer to it, we don't know exactly, but their environment is a different environment. Our terrestrial environment calls for highly articulate consciousness, manipulative consciousness. And we have that. And we can consciously choose to upshift to nature. An ant can do that. Even an ant colony, unless it has a joint consciousness, a collective consciousness, I don't think so, but it's not impossible. But it can't do that. Our consciousness is here for a purpose, is to help us come back to living a life that we were meant to live, a life of striving, a life of togetherness, a life of oneness. Again, sounds poetry, but it is the bottom line. We have to, that's the way to upshift. If we don't do that, we'll run into ever more and more crises and difficulties. We can't buck the evolutionary trend. It's there, and we are part of it. So let's study the consciousness that allows us to become consciously one with people and with nature.
We're going to take a short break now. You're listening to What Is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and my guest today is world-renowned systems philosopher, integral theorist, classical pianist, prolific author, and 2 times Nobel Peace Prize nominee, Professor Ervin Laszlo. And we're talking about his latest book, The Upshift, Wiser Living on Planet Earth. We'll be back with more from Ervin Laszlo in a few moments. Stay tuned.
OMTimes TV. Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. OMTimes Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, OMTimes offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an OMTimes magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on OMTimes TV and broadcasting it across the extensive OMTimes radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. OMTimes. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Hello, I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes' flagship radio show, What Is Going On? And as an author, editor, and 13 times book judge who's read thousands of books and interviewed hundreds of authors, I'm constantly asked what's really worth reading and what's not. So I created the No BS Spiritual Book Club to help you save time and money by picking the brains of discerning names who've walked this path before you. There's no catch, no fees, and no BS. Just an ever-growing library of 10 best spiritual book lists from some of your favourite authors and teachers, plus free book excerpts, audios and video interviews with people like Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., David G., Lee Harris, Mark Nepo and more. From well-known classics to hidden gems you've never heard of, it's the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to enlighten your journey of self-discovery. So why not join the club? Get inspired and save money at the NoBSSpiritualBookClub.com.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Ervin Laszlo, you drafted in collaboration with the Dalai Lama a manifesto on the spirit of planetary consciousness. Tell us about that manifesto.
It was a very interesting experience. It was quite an experience. And we are now, interestingly enough, there's a project now to revive that dialogue, to make it an internet-based dialogue with His Holiness. And today I've been working on my input into that, and I've been quoting the Manifesto on Planetary Consciousness. Interesting that you mentioned that, because there's no way you could have known that, actually. Something came up yesterday, and this morning I decided to open up the Manifesto and to quote the last part of the Manifesto, which is called the Call for Planetary Consciousness. And I'm suggesting that we should revive the dialogue with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and talk about the need for this kind of consciousness. Let me just say why it was such an interesting experience. At the time, I was staying at Auroville. Auroville is the international settlement in India, but not formally part of India. It's an international city in India, having its own governing board, and based on the ideas of Sri Aurobindo. Auroville is just south of Pondicherry in England, in the south of India. And at that time, I served as chairman of the Auroville board, looking at what Auroville is doing and trying to communicate it with the rest of the world so that there is support and spread the idea of Sri Aurobindo, which has the most spiritual, high uplifting ideas that you can imagine. Part of the great dimension of independence for India and the new thinking, the new India. So I was in Auroville, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama came to visit, and we sat down to talk. They allowed me to meet him. His secretary said he has a few minutes, he is very busy, he has got his whole day planned out, but let's go start talking. And he asked me, what are you working on these days? And I said, I am having a sketch. I have a project. I would like to say a manifesto on a new kind of consciousness. And he said, can I read something? Can you have something of it? I had it with me because that's what I was always thinking about those days. And I started reading. And His Holiness then stopped me every once in a while and said, add this and that, or how about that, and so on. And we ended up the rest of the day. His secretary was sitting there and noting it all down. And by the evening came, he canceled all his other appointments that day. By evening came, we had a few pages, which then became the Manifesto on the Spirit of Planetary Consciousness. And it was signed by, later on, a few months later, half a year later, at a meeting that I organized at the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. So I'm a member of that academy. I was born in Budapest. And at that meeting, His Holiness came to that meeting in the fall of 1996. We signed the Manifesto on the Spirit of Planetary Consciousness. So this was an experience, a spontaneous experience. Then we adopted this manifesto, and it's part of the work of the Club of Budapest, with its 24 member clubs worldwide, and its set of distinguished individuals. We are developing a new set because life doesn't go on forever, and there's a certain change or attrition, and we'd have to want to bring in new members, especially young members. But we are trying to work on the consciousness, on the potentials of the human spirit, and bring that to the attention of people. So that's one thing. Another project that is so relevant to what we are discussing is something that I'm working on these days. just for the last 2 weeks, very recent, but very intensely going. I decided, and I'm joined by my good friend David Lorimer, the head of the Scientific and Medical Network. I decided that we should ask thought leaders, deeply insightful scientists and spiritual people, what do they think of the path that we need to take? In my book, The Upshift, I say yes, the path to healing and evolution on planet Earth. How do you look at this path without trying to suggest it to people what you should look at? How do you think of it? Asking insightful people, articulate people to write this out. I don't know what will come out of it. The past few days, I've asked more than 2,000 outstanding individuals. I don't want to name any names for that, but they are people that you would know. Ask them to write the past in 5-6 pages. Give us an indication of what you think is the right piece, the right shift forward, the right way to go. And the answers are coming in. Just today, I got 2 very important answers. Again, no names, but I'm very delighted to have them. And I think by the end of this year, end of December, I think we will have probably 24 or more contributions to what we then jointly call the imperatives, the Upshift imperatives. And so it's another 6 months or so, and we'll publish that too. It follows the book, The Upshift, but this time it goes and taps the mind, taps the inside, the consciousness of 2,000 or more thought leaders.
Yeah. Just to go back to the manifesto, there are 3 clarion calls in that manifesto. Can you describe those to us?
Well, now you expect me to remember exactly what I've written all this time.
Well, I can tell you. I can give you. The first one is the call for creativity and diversity.
Yes. Diversity is absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, if you want to join that whole, even an atom has diverse elements. This idea that somehow things are just by things coming together into contact, and that's what makes a larger whole, just more of the same. The larger whole is not more of the same. You know that even quantitatively, a whole is never the sum of the parts. It's always something else added. The wholeness is another factor. Diversity is to make wholes. Nature makes wholes, creates molecules, cells, macromolecules, crystals, or single-cell organisms, multicellular organisms, ecologies of organisms, and a planetary ecology. These are all whole systems made of diverse parts. Oneness is not created by just adding one thing together, just multiplying things. Opening up to everything else, but embracing diversity and working with diversity. So that's something we recognized already in the late 20th century in the Manifesto, which becomes, I think, more and more evident. The need for it becomes more and more evident as we go on today.
The second one is the call for responsibility.
It's an awful word, actually. Very often said, I'm just responsible. When something goes wrong, and then people feel, well, you're being accused of being responsible. Lots of things have gone wrong. And now the whole planetary system in which we're living has gone off track. And so, my goodness, that means that we are responsible. But there is a call to assume responsibility for what we can do, for what we truly are, and do it to the best of our ability. What we can do is to try to live together so all can live. And it's one of the things that I'm saying in this book, that's ethics, living in a way that other people can also live. I don't necessarily mean they have to live the same way, but they can also exist. They have often lived in a way that used up too many resources, used up too much of the energy, of the attention, of the insight and information, so that many people were locked out of it. It's not ethical to do anything that it cannot be shared by others. Today, it's close to 8 billion people. At least in principle, we must be able to live in a way that enables or allows at least other people to live as well. As I said, not necessarily the same way. They live their own way, live the way they can. We are also diverse ourselves, but to live, to strive, and to become more of what we are, whole systems working together with all life on the planet.
Yeah. And of course, the third one is the call for planetary consciousness.
It was misunderstood, just as I said, it was misunderstood in the beginning. My goodness, planetary consciousness, you mean the consciousness of the planet. In the beginning, this was a relatively new term. It was not much used. Now people, when we talk about planetary consciousness, they don't misunderstand it usually. You know, it's a new human consciousness which embraces the planet. It's not the consciousness of the planet. Even though I should add, as a philosopher, I'm convinced that all large bodies of the universe have their own consciousness, all complex bodies, including the planet.
Yeah. You know, I recently interviewed Jude Currivan, who I know is a good friend of yours and, you know, sometime collaborator as well. And I loved what Jude says in her new book, you know, that we need to start seeing ourselves as Gaians, not Americans or Britons or whatever, but as Gaians, you know, and then we will begin to understand that we are one.
As I said, multiple identities. We have a largest identity, which means you're a living being in this universe. That's already an identity. Not everything is a living being. The living beings that emerge are a particular articulate expression of the evolutionary drive toward creating complex and coherent systems. Here I'm using one term, coherence, which is so important because nowadays we recognize that nature is coherent. Einstein said also, it's almost a miracle that in all this welter of chaos, welter of interactions that is happening in space and time, there's something coherent is emerging, as coherent as a system of life. And even the universe, the planets, the system of planets, the galaxies are themselves coherent systems. From the initial chaos after the Big Bang, ever more coherence is emerging in space and time. That's the great forward trend. That's the upshift trend. It's an attractor. I call it the holotropic attractor in my current work. Holos means, toward wholeness. Tropic means a tropism, something that is pulling you towards something. It's an attraction toward. The universe appears to be attracted toward wholeness. Wholeness means a joining together of different diverse elements into wholeness, And so that recognizing or being part of that is our largest identity. Within that, there are multiple identities. Being part of life on Earth, a Gaian identity, is certainly a very important element.
I find it really interesting. You were a concert pianist. You are still a pianist. When you think about music, all of the things that that makes music so wonderful and, connects us to our soul are the same things that you're talking about now: coherence, harmony, all of these qualities. Do you notice? Do you regard yourself as some kind of musician in a sense of what you're preaching about the planet?
I don't know what I regard myself. I'm a seeker. I try to find things and particularly find that wholeness, that harmony, which you find in music. Not in every kind of music. I don't relate to music that just do violent with the drums and percussions and whatnot. It doesn't have to be sentimental songs, but music which is at a high level, it's a unit of perfection. Every element of it is perfect. when Mozart was asked, I think, by the Duke or Emperor at the time in Austria, aren't you writing too many notes? And Mozart replied, this was in the film Amadeus, I think. No, Your Highness, there are just as many notes as need to be, neither more nor less. So in a masterpiece, every note counts. And you can't remove any note without destroying the oneness, the unity, the coherence. You can't even also just arbitrarily add on anything. So this is what I'm seeking. I'm seeking that perfection, where all things cooperate to maintain, to be the whole. The expression of art, the experience of art, the aesthetic experience is precisely that. When we talked earlier about the ways that we can approach this higher level of upshifted consciousness, talking about the nature experience, I would like to add the aesthetic experience of human artifacts, music, painting, even dance in a way that we dance. It's all human artifacts. And that they express wholeness and oneness, and that experience, which is a high level of deep experience, a highly satisfactory experience of oneness. That, I think, is again one of the ways that we can evolve our consciousness so that we move toward this higher level of upshift that is so badly needed in the world, and that we can contribute to. But these are all past ways to move toward it.
You created the Upshift movement, which you're inviting everybody to join. What is its objective and its mission?
Okay, I can share with you. I've written out the mission statement. I can make it available, and when the time comes, I'm happy to present that. Next week, we are going to have a meeting in Rome, Italy, of the members of what we call now the WUM, the W-U-M, the World Upshift Movement. It will have its own board, and it's registered formally as a movement at the so-called Companies House in London, in England. But it will be an international registration, obviously. And it will have its own website, developing the current website, which remains, but it will be developed as such. We have to emphasize the term world, which we added to it, because it's not a local initiative in any sense. I would like it to be an initiative of the US, yes, certainly, of Europe, but also of the East and of the South. So, and I'm going to ask organizations, I think I'll ask the OM radio and TV as well, to see in which way we could adhere to this movement so it becomes an international, a world movement. I myself, if I may add, I dislike somewhat, mistrust the term international. We're not talking about nations being connected in some way. We're talking transcending the level of nations so that we become global, which is what we truly need to be. So a world movement, that is our goal. And I hope to involve people at all levels of insight and education and all different interests to come together, because it's our world and it's one world and we are one with it. And so let's see how each of us can contribute to it. We all can. Let's be articulate. Let's talk to each other about that.
Can children become part of this movement?
Children are part of this movement.
They are part of the movement.
I think they only get corrupted when they go to school. I think.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Yeah. I mean, certainly your book, The Upshift, should be part of the school curriculum.
There are wonderful schools as well. I don't disregard that. But when we are told that, we are only concerned with human affairs as though they will be separate, we are only concerned with our national interests as though it will be separate, then those are corrupting influences. I've been talking to some people trying to develop an upshift in business, and I say that there are two terms that I find very dangerous. One is in the business world particularly. One is private, it's a term, and the other is national. A private business, it's a private sector. We used to say that in Europe, when we had communism, we were looking for the private sector, a small sector, but more freedom. And I was happy with my parents also to belong to the private sector. But now it's not a question of private sectors. All businesses practically private, except for a very small part, state-owned enterprises. But the question is how that the private sector becomes public, becomes part of the human enterprise. Yeah. Not by taking it out of hand and then trying to organize it, to direct it by a group of people, managers or politicians or whatnot, but how becoming by spirit, becoming a public enterprise, having the public, the human spirit as its guiding principles. Profit, yes, it needs to be to run the organization, but not as an end in itself and by itself. Profit to become one and part of a diverse whole system, which you can call the Gaia system, which is the planetary system, is a planetary consciousness. That is the great chance, the great challenge that we face.
If people started taking the steps that you advocate now, and now is the only time, that they should be doing that, how long do you think it would take to turn things around?
Next week.
Next week?
Yes. Things could go very fast, you see. The way ideas spread, the way insights and beliefs spread can be very rapid. There's an openness now because the old ways of thinking and believing and feeling are breaking open. The danger is that before reaching the new way, the natural way, we break down in depression, and fear, the negative attributes. But if we don't break down in between, we reach the next level, and the next level will be beyond what we have today. We'll be at a higher level, at an upshifted level. And that could go very fast. Sure, next week, could be next year. But we don't have too much time. We don't have decades. We have years. So let's get going with it.
We have a situation in England right now, especially in London, where a lot of people who are very concerned about climate are taking radical action. They are sitting on freeways and blocking traffic for hours on end. They're standing on big bridges, etc. Have we lost you, Ervin? No, there you are. They're doing all kinds of things. There was a report just the other day of a young woman in her mid-20s who was standing on top of one of our major bridges, and they had to close the bridge down and all the traffic. And the public are getting very annoyed because they're not being able to continue their normal daily life. But this young woman was crying. As she said, I know that everybody is going to hate me for what I'm doing, but you are robbing me of my future. And it was such an emotive thing to hear and to see this young woman crying and taking such radical action, knowing that it's going to make her very unpopular. What would you advise that some of these young people do instead?
Well, it's fine to take individual action, but you're exposing yourself to a great deal of criticism and a blockage. Try to create a movement. Try to bring together other people. Of course, the great sudden movements that happened very, very quickly in the 20th century were mostly negative movements. Not all, because there was Gandhi's insight that led to the independence of India and the new way of looking at things. There was Castro's attempt to create a more egalitarian society in Cuba and so on. But most of the great movements that got going very fast had negative consequences. Lenin started very positively. He started by trying to create a more collective, a human, as he called it, a new society, a proletarian society. But he did it by counterposing it to a negative movement, to the capitalist movement. So we are fighting the proletarian struggle, fighting the capitalists, and fighting the free enterprise. And that became a very negative struggle among political groups. But there was also, but the principle was good, actually, I must say. And there was also Mao in China, completely reformed from Chiang Kai-shek, from one day to the next, practically, reformed the entire Chinese system, moving it into this new level. Not necessarily the way it can continue to be under racist practice, but it changed it tremendously, the feudal system into a completely different system. So things can move very fast, very, very fast. And when good ideas catch hold, they also can move. Good ideas can go very deep. There was a being on this earth, on this planet, whose beliefs, whose personality has created lasting change that changed the world forever. It was known as Jesus Christ. And the love that he brought forth, he radiated, inspired some disciples. And those disciples inspired some more. And despite of the repression of the classical Roman Empire, this movement survived and it spread and became Christianity as a force in the world. Tremendous, tremendous events happening. From Hitler to Jesus, the largest possible contrasts. So this is just a response to the question, how long would it take? It can go very fast. But the deep changes take a time to happen. But we have to keep in mind that the time is not likely to be very long because we don't simply have long time for change to happen. Things will break down before if we don't act in time, if we don't make the change happen in time. So let's not worry about the time. Let's start it and it will go. It's a snowball effect. It's a butterfly effect, the idea of the butterfly effect, of butterfly flapping its wings in California.
Yes.
We create a storm in Mongolia.
Yeah.
It amplifies and it amplifies because we are dealing with a so-called turbulent system. It's a non-linear system. Lots of things can happen from one moment to the next. And this led the anthropologist Margaret Mead to say, never doubt the power of a small group of people to change the world. And she added, nothing else ever had. I will still add another thing, nothing else ever had, especially when the world is unstable and it's already on the point of bifurcation, then the change can be very fast. So I'm optimistic about change being able to happen and happen fast.
The Russian writer Leo Tolstoy once said the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that do. So I guess we all need to get a bit crazier.
Yes, I think it's almost a necessity, but this means being a hopeful monster. Let me come up with this last discussion as the last metaphor. Sometime some biologists, some decades ago, came up with this concept of the hopeful monster. The hopeful monster is simply a mutation in a species which is ahead of its time, which is now a monster because it doesn't fit the rest, and it's being exposed and expelled from the rest because it's not understood. But when the change comes about, when the mutation happens elsewhere too, then it becomes the forerunner of a new species. Yeah. That's why it's hopeful. But right now it's a monster. So I would say, let's be more and more hopeful monsters.
I think that's a really good note to end the show on. Ervin Laszlo, thank you so much for joining us today.
And really, it was a great pleasure on your part, and to you and your network are doing a wonderful job. It was my pleasure and privilege to talk with you.
Thank you. The Upshift, Wiser Living on Planet Earth, is published by, I think it is Waterside Productions. If you want more information about Ervin Laszlo's work, his books, and the Upshift movement, visit upshiftmovement.com and ervinlaszlobooks.com. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. Thanks for joining us today, and I look forward to being with you at the same time next week. Till then, it's goodbye from me.